everybody. Thanks for coming. I want to thank all of you for showing up today and yesterday. These competitors here today, the guys I see back there, it's been an amazing competition so far, but it really would not be what it is without everybody chipping in and taking part, from bailiffs to judges to Josh, Alex, Drew, Professor Feldman. So it's been really special, and it's taken a lot of work, but we really enjoyed it. So today we'll be going through the final. This is the arbitration hearing for Lorenzo Cain between Cain's counsel and the Kansas City Royals over here. The player will start by giving a 15-minute segment of opening remarks, followed by the club's segment of opening remarks, also 15 minutes. Then we will proceed into the player's rebuttal for 7.5 minutes, and lastly, the club's rebuttal. Josh, who's sitting in the front row here, will give a warning at 5 minutes and then 1 minute by holding up a red card in the opening rounds. And then for the rebuttal, he will do the same at 3 minutes and 1 minute. So without further ado, we're going to get started here with the player's counsel. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Delo Letterman. These are my co-counsels, Garrett Hamill and Tyler Raymond. And today we will be representing Lorenzo Cain in these arbitration proceedings. Now, over the course of my presentation, I'll be referring to the slides, so feel free to follow along. I'll be directing you to notations that are on the slides, tables, and graphs. In the arbitration proceeding today, the midpoint at issue is $2.725 million, and we are requesting that Mr. Cain be awarded a salary above this point. Now, over the course of this presentation, I'll be alluding to 3 primary features of Mr. Cain's game. The first is that he is an elite defensive player. In the outfield, he is a tremendous asset, regardless of the position he plays, and he is always a plus. Secondly, Mr. Cain is not only an elite defensive player, he's also a dynamic offensive force. He can create runs at the plate and on the base path. And finally, Mr. Cain has proven that he can deliver when it matters most, the postseason. He was awarded the 2014 American League Championship Series Most Valuable Player Award for his play in the 2014 postseason, as an indication of just how effective he was. Now, the bottom line of Mr. Cain's play throughout his career up to his first year of arbitration eligibility is that, whether by running, catching, or hitting, he helps his team win games. And to this end, he is a well-rounded player. And it is this well-roundedness I will be alluding to throughout the presentation. Now, the first feature I'll be touching on is that Mr. Cain is an elite defensive presence. He's showcased throughout his career that he has been able to get it done in the field. He has remained remarkably consistent or improved upon nearly every statistical category. In the past 2 years, he's been more impressive than ever. If we look at his 2014 statistics, just giving you a quick snapshot of some of the traditional stats. You see in fielding percentage, putouts, assists, and errors, he's in the top 10 of all American League outfielders. Now, these statistics on their own, they're impressive, but they don't tell you the whole story of how impressive Mr. Cain has been defensively in 2014. For that, we need to look at the advanced defensive statistics. As you can see, by UZR, DRS, and DWAR, he is among the best fielders in the American League, finishing in the top 2 of each and every one of those categories. Now, UZR, or ultimate zone rating, places a run value on defense and measures how many runs a player gave up or saved through their overall fielding ability. Now, similarly, DRS, or defensive run save, also puts a run value on defense. And once again, it measures the amount of runs a player saved through their overall defensive ability in the field. And finally, DWAR, or defensive wins above replacement. It places a relative value on defense, and it measures how many wins a player is worth defensively compared to a replacement level player. Now, in the abstract, some of these statistics might be difficult to quantify. What do they mean? Well, if you look at the table in front of you, there is a direct correlation between scoring highly in these statistics and being awarded with a gold glove. As you can see, Alex Gordon, Jason Hayward, Gerardo Parra, Carlos Gomez, each of these players ranked highly in each and every one of these statistical categories. Now, to this end, had Mr. Cain only scored highly in one or two of these categories, it might be possible to play down their importance. But his presence at or near the top of every statistical category paints a very clear picture. And that is he is one of the premier fielders in the major leagues today. Now, what makes this even more impressive is that Mr. Kane plays his home games in Kauffman Stadium. Kauffman Stadium has the largest fair territory of any American League ballpark at 2.63 acres. It's more than 6,000 square feet larger of fair territory than the major league average. Now, moving on, Mr. Kane is not just an elite defensive player. He's also shown that he is a dynamic offensive threat. He can run, he can hit, he can steal, he can do it all, and he can drive and runs as well. Now, in the past, there has been a concern and over Mr. Kane's lack of playing time that he would ever be able to transform his potential into consistent performance. However, in 2014, his most complete season to date, he was given the platform upon which to show just what he can do in a full season. And as you can see by his 2014 offensive performance on the slides, Mr. Kane was excellent. He was a 300 hitter over the course of the entire season. He also showed an ability to get on base consistently. And it is worthwhile to note that on Kansas City, a team that struggled for power hitting, Mr. Kane, who's not renowned for his power abilities, was able to finish with the second highest slugging percentage on his team. Now, Mr. Kane's value does not only come into plate. He's also a threat on the base path. He can steal at any time and move into scoring position, helping his team. 28 stolen bases. And that doesn't even tell the whole story of how effective he was. He was only caught stealing on 5 occasions, giving him a success rating of nearly 85%. Now, to this end, Mr. Kane is not a power hitter. It's not what he does. And some people might point to that as being a flaw of his, but ultimately, he makes up for his lack of power hitting by being so good at everything else that he does. He gets on base, and when he's on base, he creates runs by moving forward in the bases and helping his team win. In Kansas City in 2014 recognized Mr. Kane's ability to be one of their most effective offensive players. He started the season hitting in the 6, 7, and 8 spot over the first few months of the season, and by September, he was consistently hitting in the number 3 spot. And that alone, I submit, is proof that Kansas City recognizes how much of an effective force he can be offensively. Now, Mr. Kane, through his overall play, led Kansas City to their most wins since 1989 and their first playoff berth in 29 years. And he continued his effective season into the 2014 postseason. As you can see from the picture on the bottom of the slide in front of you, he was awarded an American League Championship Series Most Valuable Player award. His play in 2014, well, the numbers speak for themselves. In 68 playing appearances, he scored a .333 batting average, a .388 on-base percentage, and finished with the 4th most runs batted in the Major League playoffs. Now, the club might point to the fact that Mr. Kane struggled somewhat in the American League Divisional Series. But ultimately, his ability to showcase over the course of the entire playoffs that he is able to perform when it matters most is proof that in a league that values clutch performance, he has what it takes to deliver. Now, at this point, I'm going to switch gears and talk about some comparable players. And the 3 comparable players I'm going to compare Lorenzo to today are Colby Rasmus, John Jay, and Austin Jackson. And as you can see from the graph in front of you, the salaries of these 3 players range from $2.7 to $3.5 million. And it's worthwhile to note that each and every one of these salaries, none of these players actually went to arbitration. They all settled beforehand. So we would submit that these are strong indicators that this is the true market value of these players. And it is our assertion that Mr. Kane's value lies towards the upper echelon of these totals, or at the very least above the midpoint at issue today. So the first player I'm going to be touching on today is Mr. Colby Rasmus. Mr. Colby Rasmus was given a $2.7 million contract in his first year of arbitration eligibility. And his contract stands for one simple principle, that prior offensive inconsistency is no bar to a substantial salary, where a player proves they can deliver over the course of an entire season. As the graph shows in front of you, with Mr. Rasmus being the red line, leading into his first year of arbitration eligibility, he only truly had one effective season at the plate. As you can see from his on-base percentage, it spiked greatly in 2010, indicated by year 2 on the graph in front of you. Now, it's not just his on-base percentage that fluctuated. His batting average and slugging percentage also varied wildly from year to year. Even his runs batted in total went up and down in his first 3 years in the league. Yet despite this inconsistency, he was still given a substantial $2.7 million contract in his first year of arbitration eligibility. Now, once more, looking at the graph in front of us, and Mr. Kane is indicated by the blue line, we can see that Mr. Kane has been similarly inconsistent going into his first year of arbitration eligibility. You see that his only truly great season thus far at the plate was in his platform year. In his platform year, he played better than he did in either of the 2 previous years. So to this end, like Mr. Rasmus, he has had only one truly great year before entering arbitration eligibility. Of course, the primary difference between these 2 players is that Mr. Kane's excellent season came in his platform year, whereas Mr. Rasmus's did not. Now, I'll be touching on the importance of platform season performance in a moment, but first, I'd like to take a second just to indicate just how much better Mr. Kane has been than Mr. Rasmus defensively at this stage in their career. As you can see from the second table on the slides in front of you, in their platform season, Mr. Kane bested Mr. Rasmus in every statistical category. It's indicative of just how much better he was to look at the advanced defensive stats. He wasn't even close to Mr. Kane in either DRS or UZR. Now, given their offensive similarities, this difference in defensive value alone is enough to put Mr. Kane's value $25,000 above Mr. Rasmus's, and that would place us to the midpoint. So that concludes what I have to say about Mr. Rasmus, and I'll now be moving on to deal with my second point in terms of comparable players. And that is that platform season performance matters. And for this discussion, I will be turning to Mr. John Jay and his $3.25 million contract, and Mr. Austin Jackson and his $3.5 million contract. As you can see from the table in front of you, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Jay both had strong offensive numbers going into their platform seasons. But Mr. Jay was better than Mr. Jackson in nearly every regard, the exception being stolen bases. Now, when we consider these differences in platform performances, it might be somewhat difficult to understand why Mr. Jay received $250,000 less than Mr. Jackson, especially when we consider that both players have not spent a significant amount of time on the disabled list, and as we will see later on, they are very similar defensive players. An answer lies in an examination of how they played in their platform seasons. So if we look at their platform season performances, they had completely different seasons. Mr. Jackson, his career went on the up, as he posted career highs in nearly every statistical category. Conversely, Mr. J struggled, as he set career lows and struggled to be consistent on a day-to-day basis. Now, to this end, Mr. Jackson was awarded for his improved consistency with a contract that was $250,000 higher than Mr. J, because he showed the career arc that clubs covet. Now, as we've already discussed, Mr. Kane has had an excellent platform season in 2014. He showed that he can be consistent and that he can deliver on a day-to-day basis. In this sense, he has shown a similar career arc to Mr. Jackson. Now, it's worthwhile to note that Mr. Jackson and Mr. Kane, they've had similar careers to date to the first year of arbitration eligibility. If we look at their numbers in their first 3 years of Major League service time, they're strikingly similar. Now, I won't deny that Mr. Jackson has been better than Mr. Kane in several statistical categories. And as a result of this, he deserves his $3.5 million contract, a number which is higher than the $3.35 million offered by Mr. Kane today. But the differences between these two players are not large enough to justify a $750,000 drop between Mr. Jackson's salary and Mr. Kane's salary to below the midpoint. Lorenzo has proven himself in the postseason. He's proven himself on the base path and at the plate. And as we will see, he's a better defensive player.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Austin Jackson's played essentially a season more.
Yeah.
He's played 600 or so more plate appearances.
Mm-hmm.
Why is he a competent player when he's roughly years more from the club? Seasons were more performance.
So he's played more games than Mr. Jackson, and he's had more plate appearances. But at the end of the day, they have the same Major League service time. Plate appearances are one factor under the CBA that needs to be examined when we're moving forward, but it is only one factor. Mr. Kane has shown in his one season, his most complete season to date, that he's able to perform when he has the opportunity. So while he doesn't necessarily have the amount of playing time under his belt that Mr. Jackson does, his body of work is very comparable. In less time, he has almost as many stolen bases, almost as many RBIs. It really paints a picture that Mr. Kane, when given the opportunity, he can succeed at this level.
Well, what about the fact that Jay, if you look at Jay too, he had 200 more hits in his career. Factor that.
Well, once again, hits are a consideration moving forward in the arbitration hearings. It's a season's worth of hits. Once again, it's a counting statistic. It doesn't paint quite the same picture as something like an average or an on-base percentage rate. Mr. Kane has shown that while he doesn't have the same body of work, and he hasn't been able to, I suppose, perform at the same level as consistently as these players, when he is on the field, he performs at the same level. So ultimately, the hits, I'd say, are simply a feature of their increased playing time, which is a factor that needs to be considered. So just moving on quickly, no player is as well-rounded as Mr. Kane. None of these players are an asset offensively and defensively. As you can see from the table in front of you, he's greatly outperformed these players. As such, he should be awarded a salary above the midpoint. Thank you.
Team 11 is elected to present their opening statement of service.
Sorry, everybody. Sorry.
Good morning, Mr. Arbitrators. My name is Rob Annis, along with my co-counsels, Rich Readers, and Greg Scipio. And we represent the Kansas City Royals in this proceeding today. We place binders in front of you. If I could direct your attention to slide 3. We'd like to remind the arbitration panel that Mr. Kane has filed for a $3.35 million salary. The team has countered with $2.1 million, bringing about a midpoint of $2.725 million. And Mr. Kane has acquired 3.074 years of major league service. Looking forward to slide 5, we'll go through the themes of our hearing that we'll be discussing today. First is the lack of power. Mr. Kane is not a power hitter, and power is what pays in arbitration. Because of that, the Kansas City Royals depend on Mr. Kane to get on base, whether it's hits, walks, whatever it may be, so that the power hitters in the league can drive him home. However, an issue with Mr. Kane that we're concerned of is his low walk rate. Even in his platform season, Mr. Kane only drew 24 walks. This is a concern because it hurts his on-base percentage and his ability to get on base for these power hitters to drive him home. Next is Mr. Kane's career inconsistencies. We'll show you in a minute that no season for Mr. Kane has ever been alike. So it's difficult to really gauge his value. Also, his inability to stay healthy. Mr. Kane has had a groin injury in every single year that he has been in the majors. As our starting center fielder, and as a guy that we depend on getting on base and running the bases, his legs are a huge part of Mr. Kane's game. Therefore, it's concerning that because Mr. Kane has a recurrent groin injury in every single year, that this could happen again. Finally, his lack of experience. Because Mr. Kane has missed so much time throughout his career, he has not been able to gain the necessary and proper experience that the Royals would like to see in order to award him a salary above the minimum. Turning next to slide 6, this is Mr. Kane's offensive statistics throughout his career. Now, you'll notice that there are inconsistencies all throughout. First and foremost is games played. As we mentioned, Mr. Kane has had a groin injury in every single year. So the amount of games that he has played has varied from season to season. So it's hard to really find a value for him when he's playing a different amount of years in each season. This goes also for RBIs, for walks, his batting average. He's only batted .301 in his platform season. However, in the past, he has batted .273, .266, and .251. So therefore, it's really hard to gauge whether he's the .251, .266 hitter or the .301 hitter that he's hit only in his platform season. Turning next to slide 8. This is Mr. Kane's pre-platform season in 2013. Now, you'll notice in the categories that are most important for Mr. Kane, in terms of runs, hits, batting average, and on-base percentage, he does not rank higher, or he does not rank within the top 50 Major League outfielders, 72 Major League outfielders, who have at least 425 plate appearances. However, on slide 9, his platform season, although his numbers increase, there's still a variation from season to season. So, as we stated, it's hard to really assess Mr. Kane's value over his career because of the differentiations in his season and his ranking and his numbers. Directing your attention to slide 12, going back to one of our themes of lack of power. Power is what pays in arbitration, and this is something that Mr. Kane has severely lacked, and he is not a power hitter. You'll notice that his ISO, which takes into consideration slugging and batting average, has been below the AL average every single year of his career, including his career ISO, which is 30 points below the AL average. Not only his ISO, but you'll notice his slugging percentage and his home run percentage. Out of the 50 Major League outfielders, he is towards the bottom half in all of those categories. So this is something that the Royals are taking into consideration in assessing Mr. Kane's value.
Slide 13 is extremely important. What it does is it shows all Major League outfielders who came up for arbitration for the first time since 2006. Here's Mr. Kane with the black dot and the orange circle. What it shows is that there's an extremely strong correlation between home runs hit over your career and the amount of money you're going to receive. Only one player since 2006 has had fewer career home runs at 17 while receiving a contract greater than the midpoint. That was Brett Gardner, who received a salary of 2.8, just above the midpoint. And the reason why he did so is because he was a fantastic defensive player, just like Mr. Kane. However, he does not have the injury concerns that Mr. Kane has. He doesn't have the inconsistency that Mr. Kane has. And he has more playing time than Mr. Kane. What we really like to hammer home is that home runs make such a tremendous difference. Now, moving on to slide 14, RBIs have an even greater correlation. And the same thing holds true. Now, if you look at the line over here, what it really shows is that if there was an exact correlation, where would it be? And as you can see here, with Mr. Kane, his black dot there, if you bring it towards the line where the correlation is, it would bring him below the midpoint. And again, this is the same exact sample size of every single player who's been arbitration eligible since 2006, who's an outfielder. Moving on to slide 15, it shows that Mr. Kane has had a low walk rate his entire career. He's been below average in every single year. Out of the 50 major league outfielders with at least 500 plate appearances during the platform year, he ranked 46th in walks and 49th in walks per strikeout. Now, it's very important because ideally Mr. Kane would be a top of the order hitter, where he would get on base and use his athleticism to get on base and score a lot of runs. However, unfortunately, if you look at the next slide, slide 16, you'll see that manager Ned Yost can't really bat him at the top of the order due to his low batting average and low on base percentage at the top of the order. He batted .307 in the 1 and 2 holes during his platform season and was placed 6 to 8, 65% of the time. And this holds true over his career as well. He had a career on base percentage of .303 in the 1 to 3 hole, and he batted 6 to 9, 70% of the time. So Mr. Kane is asking for $3.35 million. Yet he's a bottom of the order hitter the majority of the time. And the players who make that kind of money are top of the order hitters or middle of the order hitters, and that's a very key distinction. Looking at slide 17, we can talk about one of our other themes, career inconsistencies. In 2012, Mr. Kane had a .266 batting average. It decreased to .251 in 2013, and then ballooned up to .301. Now, we're very happy that Mr. Kane had a .301 batting average. It's an outstanding number. However, we believe that it's inflated due to his high batting average on balls in play, which is .380. This would be the highest career total of all time. The highest career batting average on balls in play is .378 by Ty Cobb. So it's very reasonable for us to say that that's not a true reflection of what his overall value is, and that if the sample size increased, his batting average wouldn't decrease.
So, sorry to interrupt, but he got the hits.
He did.
What are relative to the other comps, maybe in the scout block?
Yeah.
Is his batting average balls in play well out of line of the other comps?
Yes, absolutely. Like we said before, Mr. Kane's batting average balls in play was historic, .380, which only Ty Cobb has.
Is your explanation that that's just lucky?
We don't want to use the term lucky. It's just a small sample size, because as we're going to get to in our other slides, he has a lack of experience. So if you can turn to slide 19, I'd like to talk about his injury history. Mr. Kane has missed 280 days due to injury over the course of his year, which is an average of 47 days. And he suffered a groin injury in every single year of his career. And he missed 18% of the games in his platform season. Now this is extremely important because Mr. Kane is a very athletic player. He uses his speed, especially on defense and on the base paths. So a player who's injured a lot of the time and who has a poor groin. And if you look at the next slide, we're going to talk about this groin. He's been placed on the DL with a left groin strain every year of his career. And players who sustain a previous groin strain are 2 to 3 times more likely to occur a recurrence in the following season. And 44% of all groin strains are caused by pre-existing injuries. Now, if you look at his second half stats, his batting average and his OPS has decreased the last 2 seasons. And we believe that part of the reason why is due to the fact that he's been having an injury. On slide 21, we're going to talk about the lack of his experience.
Counsel, let me interrupt you for a second. Is there any evidence that he was treated for a groin injury during the last half of the year, number one? And number two, is there any evidence that he's, as we get ready for spring training, that he's in any way not able to play or suffering from a groin injury now?
Well, he's had a groin injury every year of his career. And like we said, we probably think it's likely to continue. And one of the things, Mr. Kane is working with a special instructor to change his running style in order to avoid injury. So we're really hopeful that that's enough to get him back on track. I'm going to go to our comparables right now. The first comparable we'd like to use is Nyjer Morgan. Nyjer Morgan in 2012 received a salary of $2.35 million, which is $1 million below what Mr. Kane is asking for. These players are very, very similar. In a similar amount of games, they have nearly identical amount of runs, extra base hits, similar home runs, RBIs, walks, and what's very important here is both players were 300 hitters. Mr. Morgan's slugging percentage and OPS was slightly better as well. And these charts really show just how similar they are. Looking at slide 24, we can see that their games, their runs, their extra base hits, their home runs, their RBIs, and their walks are very similar. Also, their rate stats are nearly identical as well. Their batting average, their OPS, their slugging, their OPS, and their fielding percentage are nearly identical, which is what makes Mr. Morgan a fantastic comparable. Also, if you flip to slide 27, they also have the same career inconsistencies from year to year. 2 years prior to their platform season, both players had a strong season, followed by a weak season, and then a better season in their platform year. There's career inconsistencies in regard to both home runs and their OPS. Now, turning to slide 28, you can see that their career numbers are nearly identical as well. Their batting average, OPS, slugging, on base percentage, and fielding percentage are very, very similar. In fact, their fielding percentage is identical. While their home runs and their RBIs are slightly apart, we still believe due to the extra base hits and the doubles that both players are extremely similar. And these graphs would really show how similar they are. As you can see, the extra base hits, the strikeouts, the fielding percentage is slide 29. And also, if you look at their career batting average and their rate stats, batting average, on base percentage, slugging, and OPS is nearly identical. And the next player we'd like to talk about is Gerardo Parra. Gerardo Parra was a gold glove outfielder. This is slide 31. Yet he also received a salary $1 million below what Mr. Kane is asking for. In the same amount of games played, their runs are nearly identical. Extra base hits. He had more home runs. And their batting averages were very close as well, with nearly identical on base percentage. And they're also, like we said, Mr. Parra is a gold glove winning outfielder, something that Mr. Kane has never amassed in his career. Also, if you look at slide 33, you'll also see that the career inconsistencies are present in Mr. Parra as well. 2 years prior to his platform season, a decrease followed by an increase to his platform year for home runs and OPS. So the career inconsistencies with Mr. Morgan and Mr. Kane are also likewise with Mr. Parra. And these platform seasons, you can see that these charts are nearly identical as well on slide 34. Now, moving to slide 35, we're going to talk about their career statistics. And once again, these players are nearly identical. Mr. Parra has more home runs and more RBIs, which I'd like to take you back to what we said before. Only one player has ever hit fewer than 17 career home runs in their first year of arbitration since 2006. And as we can see, Mr. Parra has more home runs as well. Their batting average is identical. Their on-base percentage is identical. Their slugging percentage is identical. And their OPS is identical as well. And this is a gold glove player. So it's very difficult to make the argument that Mr. Kane deserves $1 million more than Mr. Parra when these comparables are so similar. And again, these charts on slide 36 really show the comparison as well, especially the rate stats. The average, the on-base percentage, the slugging, and OPS are so similar. Our final comparable we'd like to use is Alejandro De Aza, who we really think sums up the discussion here. The 2.05 that Mr. De Aza received in 2011 is nearly identical to what Mr. Kane is, what we're asking for here, the 2.1. Mr. De Aza hit more home runs and nearly identical amount of RBIs. Mr. Kane is a stolen base player as well, and Mr. De Aza had 26 stolen bases as well. Their batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS are nearly identical, and their fielding percentages are nearly identical as well. Also, if you look at slide 39, what you'll see is that what you can see is that there's career inconsistencies as well with Mr. De Aza. Now, moving to slide 41, you can really see how the rate stats, again, for the third comparable that we're using, is nearly identical as well. I'd like to hammer this home again. The average, the on-base percentage, the slugging, and the OPS is nearly identical for Mr. Kane and Mr. De Aza. And Mr. De Aza received exactly what we're asking for here. And over their careers, they're nearly identical as well. Similar amounts of triples. Can I finish my last thought? Again, their career batting average, base percentage, slugging, and OPS are nearly identical. In fact, Mr. De Aza's are slightly better. So, looking at the comparables that we've had, we believe that these comparables are nearly identical. Therefore, you should be below the 2.725 midpoint.
Okay, in my rebuttal today, I'll be touching on several points. The first of which I didn't have a chance to get to in my in-chief part of this, and that is that there is not necessarily a power premium at center field in the major leagues today. As this table in front of you clearly shows, their home runs is not determinative of how a center fielder is awarded their salary. If you look at the player amongst three comparables we've selected today, Colby Rasmus, 53 home runs. He got the least amount of money out of these three players. Once again, Mr. Austin Jackson, 30 home runs. He got the most amount of money. So while there is potentially a power premium at other positions across the major league, I would submit that it is not the case at center field. At center fielders, you're very hard pressed to find one who is able to hit consistently and hit lots of home runs over the course of their career. Generally, you'll find that in corner outfield positions. So to that end, what the club was suggesting in terms of outfielders and the amount of home runs they hit is perhaps slightly misleading in that it doesn't take into account solely how center fielders perform. Now, the second point that I'm going to touch on today in my rebuttal is Mr. Kane's injury history. Now, the club has touched on how he has been injured over the course of his career, but none of these injuries amount to a defect. The CBA suggests that we take into account the presence of a physical defect. For none of Mr. Kane's injuries has he ever required surgery. He has only been placed on the 60-day disabled list once. At this arbitration, what we're trying to find out is what Mr. Kane has done in the past. We're not trying to speculate whether he'll be injured again in the future. It's not relevant to our discussion today. If anything, the fact that he's been injured in the past is more persuasive that he was able, when he, in his most consistent season to date, put up the best numbers of his career. It shows that he has moved past his injuries, and he's able to offer the club with a consistent presence at the plate now and in the field where he excels. Now, the second point I'd like to touch on today is in terms of our the comparable players that the club has basically indicated that they are going to be comparing Mr. Kane to today. The first of which I'll be touching on is Gerardo Parra. Now, Gerardo Parra has won a Gold Glove. It's true. But Gerardo Parra won that playing primarily in a corner outfield position. As we've already discussed, corner outfield and center field are not the same positions. Center field, there is a significantly larger amount of responsibility defensively that comes with playing center field. Now, the club side will likely respond with the fact that Mr. Kane played some games at center field in 2014 and some games at right field in 2014. This is true. He was brought in at times. Jared Dyson was brought in at times in games. And during these times, Mr. Kane would be shifted to right field. However, this is not so much an indictment of Mr. Kane's abilities at center field as it is an indication of just how good he is defensively. Late in games, where they struggled at right field with Nori Aoki defensively, they would shift Mr. Kane over to shore up right field. If Mr. Jared Dyson was that much better than Mr. Kane at center field, he would be starting. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't. It was Mr. Kane. Now, also, in terms of Mr. Parra, we need to look at their postseason performances. Mr. Parra played in the 2011 National League Divisional Series. And in that, he was awful. He hit a 187 batting average and struggled throughout his season. And while that's a small sample size, you only get a small chance when it comes to the postseason. You don't get do-overs. So when your time comes, you have to be able to perform. And finally, in terms of Mr. Parra's Gold Glove, yes, Mr. Kane has not received the Gold Glove. But in 2013 and 2014, he was awarded the Wilson Defensive Player of the Year award. And the difference between these two awards is, one, the Gold Glove is awarded on subjective criteria, whereas the Wilson Defensive Player of the Year is awarded on more objective criteria. Now, the second player I'd like to touch on in terms of their comparable players is Mr. Niger Morgan. Now, Niger Morgan was, like Mr. Parra, he does not have a strong postseason pedigree like Mr. Kane. Once again, he played in the 2011 postseason and struggled greatly in the National League Divisional Series and the National League Championship Series. During this time, over 32 plate appearances. He finished with a 179 batting average, a 281 on-base percentage, and a 250 slugging percentage. These players simply don't have the same postseason pedigree as Mr. Kane. Mr. Kane's an American League Championship Series most valuable player. He's shown he has what it takes to deliver at the highest levels. He should be compensated as such. Now, the final thing that I'd like to touch on today is Mr. Kane's defensive capabilities. Defense is a very important part of Mr. Kane's game. He's renowned across the league, whether perhaps more so now than ever before, because of his highlight reel catches he made in the 2014 postseason. To disregard his defensive contributions would be to disregard a large part of the value that Mr. Kane brings. In 2014, we know, and across the past decade, Major League run production has been going down at a steady rate. Games are closer than they've ever been before. And today, you need players that are able to contribute runs and safety runs in the outfield. With advanced defensive metrics as they are today, we're able to measure just how good a player is defensively. And all the statistics paint the same story. Mr. Kane is among the best fielders in the major leagues. At center field, where strong defensive play is crucial, you cannot overlook Mr. Kane's defensive contributions and what he brings to the Kansas City Royals. Now, finally, I would just like to conclude by saying that Mr. Kane is an asset offensively and defensively. Bringing it back to the comparables that I brought up earlier, Mr. Rasmus, Mr. Jackson, and Mr. J. He's been able to put up similar offensive numbers to these three players, while outperforming them substantially in the outfield. Now, this is not to say that Mr. Rasmus, Mr. J, and Mr. Jackson are bad players. They are not. They are important members of their team. But none are as well-rounded or as versatile as Mr. Kane. In today's major leagues, the value of such well-rounded players should be recognized as they are rare. As such, I would ask you to award Mr. Kane a salary above the midpoint today. Thank you. Mr. De Aza? Yeah, no, absolutely, I can touch on him. Just in the interest of time, I wasn't going to touch on him. But Mr. De Aza, if we look at their advanced defensive metrics once more, Mr. Kane absolutely blows Mr. De Aza out of the water. By DRS, Mr. De Aza had a -5 score, whereas Mr. Kane had a 24. By UZR, once again, Mr. Kane had a 17.6 score, and Mr. De Aza had a -1.3. And furthermore, in the traditional defensive stats, he was better as well. He bested them in errors, assists, and fielding percentage. Now, he was also superior offensively, as he put up more runs batted in, home runs, and stolen bases over the course of his career. Thank you.
First of all, we'd just like to talk about, we are not here to discount Mr. Kane's defense. Mr. Kane is a fantastic defensive player. Anyone who saw him in the postseason can really attest to the fact that he is a fantastic defensive player. What we're speaking about is that defense in an arbitration setting does not have the impact that Mr. Kane's side is saying. And we think it's really important how they talked about Gerardo Parra shouldn't be considered. In his 2014 platform season, Mr. Kane played 93 games in center field and 77 games in right field. So that's a very significant amount of time he played in right field. So Mr. Parra, who won a Gold Glove as a right fielder, we believe it is a very good comparison. Also, we'd like to talk about his postseason. Just again, Mr. Kane did a fantastic job for us in the postseason. And anyone who watched would say that. However, Mr. Kane had 3 great series in which he played 12 games. Over his career, he's played 358 games. We do not believe that the 12 games that he played should make such a tremendous difference to outweigh the 358 games that he's played during his career. And my colleague will then talk about the comparisons.
We'd like to direct your attention to slide 48 to begin, talking about Mr. John Jay.
It'd be 47.
First with Mr. J, you'll notice that Mr. J has played in 1 less season than Mr. Lorenzo Kane. However, he's played in over 200 more games, showing his reliability to the team to not be oft injured. In terms of runs scored, Mr. J has almost 100 more runs. Home runs, he has 25 to Mr. Kane 17. In fact, all across the board, Mr. J has been significantly better than Mr. Kane, with the exception of stolen bases. Home runs and RBI specifically, we already touched on that. Power is what pays in arbitration. The guys that can hit the home runs and drive the runners in are the ones that are rewarded in arbitration. And this is, Mr. J has demonstrated this over the course of his career, not just in the platform season. Next on slide 52, Austin Jackson.
51.
Austin Jackson was another comparable that Mr. Kane's side has brought up. However, Mr. Jackson has amassed better numbers than Mr. Kane in only playing 3 seasons to Mr. Kane's 5. He has 441 games played to Mr. Kane's 358, showing his reliability as well in the field. The biggest difference here is Mr. Jackson's 30 home runs in his career in just 3 seasons to Mr. Kane's 17. Mr. Jackson is a power hitter compared and with 152 RBIs to Mr. Kane's 144. You should not be persuaded by this comparison. They're not the same type of player. Especially the fact that Mr. Jackson, in his rookie year, he was placed second, he finished second place in the Rookie of the Year voting. So Mr. Jackson is a significantly better player, amassing better numbers than Mr. Kane in only 3 career seasons. Sorry to make you jump around to it. To the very last page, we'll talk about Mr. Colby Rasmus. Mr. Rasmus was by far the farthest and not comparable player that Mr. Kane's side has brought up. Mr. Rasmus he's a textbook power hitter. He has 53 home runs in only 3 career years versus Mr. Kane's 17. You'll notice his batting average is rather low and his slugging percentage is rather high. This is textbook that he's a power hitter. He is not comparable to Mr. Kane at all.
There's one thing I'd also like to talk about Mr. Rasmus. Mr. Rasmus is not a good defensive center fielder. Mr. Kane is a fantastic defensive center fielder, and Mr. Rasmus is a poor defensive center fielder. So that's another reason why Mr. Rasmus is just not comparable at all. And one other thing we'd like to talk about is the injuries. He said something about a defect. We would say that a chronic groin injury that put him on the DL every single year for the past 5 years is certainly a defect. We would say it's a chronic groin injury. And
Was he injured in any game in the postseason? Any game?
he was not. However, he only played in less than 20 postseason games.
But every single one.
Yes, he did play and was very effective in postseason games.
However, 12 postseason games we feel is obviously a smaller sample size compared to the 358 career games in which he missed almost 250 of those games.
So how does it follow that he had a groin injury in 2014 and set a career high in stolen bases in 2015? Had his best offensive season in 2015.
Well, I don't think we're discounting the fact that Mr. Kane had a fantastic platform season. What we're simply trying to do right now is assess his value going forward. So we have to look at what he's done over the course of his career. So yes, he had a great platform season, but we're looking at the other seasons as well, and there's just too much inconsistency to say exactly what kind of player he is, whether he's the 2014 player going forward or whether he is the 2010 to 2013 player that we've seen in the past.
Why do I even care for what he's going to do next year at all?
Well, this is not has to do with what he's doing next year. What we're talking about is that if Mr. Kane had played a full season, we would gladly pay him more. However, for a player who only plays, like you said before, he missed 18% of the season this year. So his salary needs to be brought down because of that.
And going forward, branching off of that as well, the reason we're touching on what he's done is because that's how he assesses value right now. Not what he can project to do in the future, but what he has done in the past and what we can look to in order to assess his value today and what he's worth.
One last thing, Mr. Kane might be one of the next budding superstars. We really hope that happens, but that is not something that needs to that factors into arbitration at all.
Thank you all. We're going to have the judges step back.
On. Thanks everybody for waiting. First, I want to congratulate both these teams again. That was pretty impressive all around. We meant to preserve anonymity earlier for the arbitrators by not announcing the team names, but Team 32, representing Lorenzo King, was the University of Ottawa, and Team 11, representing the Kansas City Royals, was the University of Rutgers. So that's who we had here today, and it's my pleasure to announce that the winner of the 2015 Tulane National Arbitration Competition is the University of Ottawa. Second place, obviously, as you can infer, is University of Rutgers. Both guys very close. So what I'd like to do in a few minutes, we'll have 5 or 10 minutes for everybody to chat, but I'd like to bring our arbitrators who were kind enough to come down here and speak to us, and I'd like to have them talk a little bit about how they got their job, what they do in the industry, and then also feedback that they had on this competition for our competitors and also for people that are interested in what happened here. Kind of what goes through their mind when they think of salary arbitration, or they're prepping a case, or they're picking a number to file at. And I want to get their perspective so that you guys have a view into their thought process. So don't go away, just hang out for a couple minutes, and we'll start that at about 3, just a couple minutes before. And that'll only take about an hour, but should be pretty good. So thanks, everybody.